Beth Fukumoto is here. We're talking about where we've been. And kind of where we're going. And one thing we ought to get done with is that the Republicans were able to gain one seat in the House of Representatives.
Yes.
So we went from 7 to 8, right? Out of, for those that don't know, 51.
Right.
Which is not really a minority. It's like a super minority. You know, there's super majorities. And, okay. How does this affect your planning going forward with Mr. Johansson changing parties?
No, it doesn't. We've been at 7 before. We've been at 6 before. We've been at 4 before. So we're okay.
But there's a lot of people that are saying, hey, look, the reason why it's the same old is because of the stranglehold that the Democrat Party has on Hawaii, which makes it, I think, unique in the country.
Yes.
You know, I mean, what are some of the reasons that when people ask you and other members of the caucus, how come, there's so few Republicans? Well, how do you reply to that?
I think we can only look at the Republican Party and blame ourselves. You can't blame the voter. They're just making their choice. They pick who they think is better. We haven't put out people that voters believe will be better than the people that currently exist. And that's nothing against the candidates. There's something wrong with our brand, and I think it's time that we start addressing that. It's
very interesting you say that, because nationally that's going on right now, particularly for the presidential election coming up. But there has been, tremendous gains both in the House and certainly in the Senate. For the first time in a long time, the outgoing president is in an awkward position. Doesn't that say that the people across the country have spoken up?
It has across the country. I think people in Hawaii are unique, and I think that Republicans have not often enough paid attention to the uniqueness of our state. And I think if we do that and we pay more attention, and we really ask ourselves, what is it that the people of Hawaii want from the Republican Party? And we don't ask that. We like to tell them what they want. We don't ask.
One of the things that I know is important is that there was a huge upset in the gubernatorial election this year. Nobody thought that this almost unheard of guy, this Ige guy, was going to do what he did. It does show that if you come up and you make a statement and you talk to people that you can get elected.
Yeah.
You said that it's candidates. Will there be a better time, do you think, going forward, now that the tide is switched a little bit nationally? Do you think that there might be more people stepping up and saying, I want to be a part of the minority party, I want to be elected?
I sure hope so. I think part of it in Hawaii, though, is going to be us changing the way we talk to people. If you look at Governor Abercrombie, he behaves a lot like Republicans often behave. He liked to tell people what they thought and wouldn't listen to them. Yeah. And, you look at Governor Ige, and people were willing to give him a chance because they felt like they knew him. And it didn't matter that he wasn't a good speaker and that he didn't necessarily come across with a plan. They trusted him.
Yeah, and isn't that sort of the bottom line? Yeah. I mean, it's instilling the trust. There's another thing, too. I know there's a lot of controversy out there when Governor Ige said, well, it's really hard to get people to come into government jobs because the pay is so lousy. And yet those of us that are not in government jobs say, hey, what's so lousy about getting, this huge retirement benefit and everything else? Is that a problem in recruiting somebody to run for office, that they're not going to get paid enough money if they get elected?
Sometimes it is. I mean, I think there are a lot of people out there, CEOs especially, who maybe would be great leaders because they have some business experience, but they don't want to give up the money. We're supposed to be a part-time legislature, but it's not always part-time.
Okay, what I want to do is, while you and I have been talking, Raphael has been gathering some stuff. This is something pretty interesting that happened last night on Hawaii News. Now, here's, rather on KITV on Channel 4, here's Paula Akana and Kenny Choi and Catherine Cruz with people in the district, Republicans, reacting to losing Aaron Johansson.
Hopping in Hawaii tonight. Good evening, I'm Paula Akana.
And I'm Kenny Choi in for Yunji Denise. State Representative Aaron Johansson was elected as a Republican less than 2 months ago, but he'll serve Hawaii as a Democrat. KITV4's Catherine Cruz shows it's a move that generated swift and severe responses from his former party.
Peter Donales couldn't believe it. The Foster Village resident voted for Aaron Johansson and was disappointed and discouraged at the news that he's abandoned the Republican Party.
Well, I think people are going to be mad at him.
But another voter shrugged it off, saying she'd likely vote for him again, even under a different party label. The former minority leader denied his decision to switch was due to a stalemate with conservatives in the GOP.
Many in the local Republican Party are becoming more narrow in their demand for ideological purity, as well as in their demand for a combative tone and posture. I have decided to switch parties.
Last year, Johansson joined forces with Democrats to get Speaker Joe Souki back in power, but the representative said he only just approached the party this month about making the jump. He brushed off questions about how the move would help his constituents, and with committee leadership positions already set, it's not clear where he might be reassigned.
We will discuss it in the future, but it's not like he's been rewarded for what he's doing. Probably he's going to be losing some staff.
Johansson broke the news to Republicans just hours before a news conference, saying his mind was made up.
Whatever promises he made, he's going back on it. So his word is no good. And anybody whose word is not good anymore cannot be trusted.
It's a Republican district. It has traditionally elected Republicans. And so we feel that it's almost an act of fraud.
Johansson hopes voters will understand. Palcic thinks voters should get the right to a recall. The announcement was most devastating to Republican colleague Cynthia Thielen, who made an emotional appeal to the community for support.
Step up and run for office and come join me. I've been there since Eisenhower days when I was a freshman in college and joined the Republican Party. And it was one where social issues weren't what we stood for. It was fiscal responsibility.
Now, the timing is lousy for Republicans since they've just lost any gains that they made during the general election 2 months ago. Johansson joins a long list of state lawmakers to switch parties. Mike Gabbard, Leahu Issa, Willis Sparrow, and Ann Kobayashi are among those still in the political limelight. You may recall that years ago, 3 city councilmen were recalled for switching parties, but that is not an option for voters when it comes to state legislators. Paula?
Yeah, and that's somewhat of a dilemma. And there also are some things that are being said that may or may not be accurate. I know that there were a lot of people, Beth, during the campaigns that were worried about social issues. There was a lot of social issues that were kind of in some districts to make it or break it, whether or not somebody got elected, was how they felt about same-sex marriage, about church and state, and about some other things. Do you think that we are more likely to react to fiscal problems rather than social ones? I mean, people that cling to fighting about social issues, is that what's going on? I mean, what do you and then what do you think the party thinks about social issues?
I think the people of Hawaii are more likely to vote in terms of fiscal issues. I think pocketbook issues are always more top of mind for people. Social issues have been important in the last year, but let's all remember Aaron Johansson is a social conservative and remains a social conservative. So to say that social conservatives are pushing him out doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
That's sort of ironic because it's either that or one has to ask yourself, well, have you been acting for a long time? I mean,
right.
Are you somebody that you're not to be?
Right.
I remember, and even though it was a while ago, I remember when State Senator Gabbard made the switch. I know it was with pain that there's some people that have to come up with an answer.
Right.
Now here's Aaron Johansson theoretically I'm very disappointed in this and having to answer to his constituents and say, you know what, I'm sorry if I misled you, but I misled you.
Right, and I don't think don't think he did. Again, to be clear, I think he has the same values. He was a George W. Bush appointee. He has the same values. He is a Republican, but he quit because he didn't want to fight anymore. And do you want that even in a Democrat politician?
It comes in, and if you look at the Rocky movies. Not that I think that we ought to base our society on Rocky movies, but when Rocky Balboa didn't want to get the towel thrown in, because isn't that sort of what Aaron Johansson has done? He just say, you know what, rather than fight him, I'm just going to join him.
Absolutely. Yeah. He and I were in the same fight, and we're getting attacked by the same people, but I played till the end, and he didn't.
Yeah.
So
and that's an unfortunate thing. Okay, we're going to forget about that, and we're going to see what it's going to take to go forward. Speaking about energy. Beth Fukumoto Chang in the house, and she got to experience energy in our studio this morning. We got a 747 jet plane out there, and it just shows you how dependent we all are on this thing called energy. Good morning.
Good morning.
You're energetic this morning. You're all ready to roll, huh?
I am. Yeah, I had extra interviews this morning.
Oh, good for you. Well, the thing is that I'm really excited about is the pomp and circumstance and all that stuff is pow, and the doors are open, and now we're ready to do business. And at least on the surface, it appears to me that there are some pretty important measures that are going to be taken up right off the bat here in the opening session.
Yes, it looks that way.
What are your thoughts, first of all? I do know that there's a lot of areas that there's confusion between city and state. Right now, for some reason, I'm not quite sure that the city administration may want to extend the 0.5% GET tax long after it sunsets in 2022. Why is there an urge for that to happen so quickly? I'm asking this. Is it because once they extend it, they can forecast revenues and therefore borrow against it? Why do we have to do that years before it's going to be up?
Being able to forecast revenues to borrow against it is the best argument that I've heard, but I haven't heard that from the city. It's speculation. Other than that, the city hasn't given us a good reason why they need to know right now.
Yeah, I'm wondering. Yeah. But more important than that, I'm wondering, I need you to paint this line of responsibility. People on the neighbor islands that think they're not involved are involved, because if the city has a problem and goes defunct, who has to pick up the pieces?
Right, and this extending the county surcharge is something that neighbor islands could also enact. So It might not be for rail, but it could be for something else.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, does it even have to be transport oriented? Can it be energy oriented? Can it be, what if?
That's a great question. I'm not sure, actually.
I was under the impression that the ledge approved of the 0.5% surcharge for energy, for transportation related, and that if a neighbor island had a serious, whether they needed more roads or a bus system or something, they could get a similar thing.
Right. I believe that it's transportation specific.
How dangerous is it once you start approving these increases that other groups come along and say, well, we need to tack on a little something to the gross excise tax too, because we have needs?
Definitely. And every year somebody asks us for a 1% increase for, whatever it is, whether it's for teachers, and it's always for a good cause.
Of course. It makes you seem like a villain if you say no, right?
Right. And the other danger is, continuing to extend things past the date that we say we're going to is just a bad practice.
I can tell you that everybody that called once we started airing this issue said, you know what? They made us swallow this, and they said, okay, this rail thing's going to be paid for. If we just do this for a little while, everything's going to be okay. And they knew in the very beginning that wasn't going to be the case. How much oversight is the state having to spend on this particular project because it's so big?
I think the state should be spending more. I think we haven't been paying enough attention to it. And at the end of the day, the costs are coming in very high. There's article after article about cost problems. And I don't think that lies with the current Hart administration only. I think it goes back further than that.
There are actual accusations being made that say, hey, they're on purpose. They're sort of hiding the real impacts of this because they don't want us all mad at them while they're building it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the people that are currently at Hart, the people in charge, do know what they're doing, but I think that they've inherited a lot of problems and they're working within a system that is, at best, just sloppy.
It appears that most of people take a look at the numbers and say, you know what? No matter how well this thing turns out, it's never going to pay for itself.
Right.
Nor is it even designed to. Let's face it. Let's not kid ourselves.
Right.
But what is it going to do about quality of life? What is it going to do about increasing jobs? I mean, we keep getting told about this TOD, this transit-oriented development. Is that real?
It should be. I'm actually looking at some bills right now to try to encourage it, but the problem is that, or to provide some private sector incentives to encourage it, let's put it that way. The problem is the city has a lot of incentives that they're just not acting on.
Yeah.
So I think it's slowness on the part of the city in a lot of cases.
Has anything surprised you yet, personally, in your own office, come out of the blue? I mean, I know that there's an agenda that everybody brings, that you guys had some great caucus meetings and stuff. Right. But it looks like right out of the gate, there's serious stuff being looked at.
Yeah, definitely. As far as surprises in my own district, Mililani Middle School is on the road to being the only multi-track school in the state of Hawaii.
Yeah,
so,
could that be a model? Could we learn something out of this?
We can learn something not to do. It hasn't worked out well, and I don't think a lot of parents are going to like being the only multi-track school.
Yeah.
Because we increased.
Explain how that works, because it doesn't actually, particularly in what you guys are, sort of a bedroom community. community, it sort of doesn't it sort of change the dynamics of where people can be and how they can be based on where the kids are.
Yeah, so what happens is that you have 4 different tracks of children. When your kid gets to middle school, you get put on a track, and it means you might not have summers like usual, especially if you have one kid in elementary school, one kid in middle school.
Yeah, then what do you do, right? How do you plan a family vacation? Yeah, you can't do it.
And for a community that is so family-centric, especially sports, it upsets our sports programs, and our kids are doing well anyway, but despite the track system.
Why are we being told that this is an inadvisable move anyway?
I don't know. And people do keep pushing it because I think they want to reduce classroom space and that sort of thing. But it really isn't a good model. That's why other schools are going away from it.
Somebody likened it to me a while ago that certain, back in the day, I think the submarine service, they had like 3 cycles of a day. So that they had a bunk that 3 guys had to sleep in.
Yeah.
And isn't that the same thing? We're saying, well, look, we're going to keep the student ratio small because we're going to keep the thing going whenever it's sunlight.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it would come down to basically just needing one more building.
Yeah.
But this is what happens when the legislature starts to put constraints on education that they are not fully understanding of. If
you'd like to speak or if you'd like to voice concerns over something you think might be important to be brought up in this legislative session, you can do it by contacting us by phone only. No email during this session, please. And the phone number is 296-KHNR. Okay, so the doors of the legislature are open, and we're starting to find out is who's on first and what's on second. And we're trying to parse out what some of these things mean. And a lot of them mean, as we take a look at some of the wonderful things going on with highway improvements and all of that stuff and infrastructure, is development. And even though Beth Fukumoto Chang did not know earlier that there was going to be a press conference and a meeting later on over the appointment for the DLNR, there are some that are saying that Governor Ige is having a difficult time, filling some of these positions, and that's not necessarily made up. What is your thoughts on? Is it hard here to find qualified people to do these jobs? What's the big problem? Is it money?
I haven't seen him really spread out and look in the Republican Party. So I would say I think he's looking for something very specific. He's looking for loyal Democrats, and maybe it is a little bit difficult because you're looking for at a much smaller base. But as far as finding talent in Hawaii, I'm sure it can be done. Well,
one of the things that came out last week was some of the appointments are just square peg round hole, taking some person from one place and put them in another place. So now I guess the heated up deal is going to be they're looking at a private sector lobbyist going to the DLNR who was working for developers. Right. And the DLNR stance in the past has been we better take a hard look at development. They're talking about the fox and the chicken house. Right. So that's going to be a decision that you're going to be part of, right? I mean, the confirmation of all these appointments, how does it work? Do you just is it straight up and down? Do you like this guy or not?
We just get told. The Senate, I believe, does the confirmations. So
I'm
we
sorry.
just get told.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't get a choice.
It's up to the Senate.
Yeah.
But there must be still some form of input.
Oh, sure.
Where reps would go, to the senator in your district, even if it's another party, and say, hey, I'm getting calls about this guy or that lady.
Sure. I'm not sure we're going to hear a whole lot of argument. I think Governor Ige has talked a lot about increasing jobs, and the only way to do that is, one of the ways to do that quickly is increasing development.
One of the things, of course, and one of the things when attached to that is one of the other things that comes up is increasing salaries. Now, we're taking a look at the UH system, and we're taking a look at things like the zoo and all of these other kind of things that are going to fall on your desk, that fall on the desk of all of our representatives and senators. And it looks to me like there's going to be a subtle, not even subtle, and very overt saying, hey, if we want good people, we got to pay more money. Is that real?
We hear that a lot, and that can be true just because our cost of living is so high here. But I'm hoping that we hear from the governor today a little bit more about how he plans to save money. He's talked about it. He says that that's going to be the mark of his administration. So I'd like to hear the details.
Yeah, you and me both. And that being said, just so that people get an understanding, I know that everybody in the very beginning of the session says, hey, Beth, you got to do this. Hey, Beth, you got to do that. how does it work? All of these bills that are starting to come up. When do they get into a form where you can either say to somebody, "I'm going to support them," or "I don't like that because you got to do this"? Where are we?
Some of them are already up online. That's the point at which you really know is once it gets up online that it's definitely
going to be looked at.
We have until Thursday to submit bills. So the caucus package bills already went in. The governor's package is going to be coming out soon, but we have until Thursday to submit bills.
Last week I said, okay, let's be able to talk specifically about some of them and what makes them either nonpartisan or partisan. I mean, is it possible, and I'm hoping that the answer is yes, is it possible for us to get down to some business on bills that are good for everybody? And then maybe as a result of working together, take a look at some other stuff that might be a little more slanted one way or the other.
Definitely. I mean, the most divisive issues are always social issues, and I think that the legislature often focuses on social issues because they don't know what to do with everything else.
Sure.
But if we could just focus on things like jobs, I think we could find more common ground.
The job creation, first of all, in the State of the Union address, some are saying that the president made a huge error using an analogy, try to raise a family of four on a minimum wage, when nobody that has a family of four would be making a minimum wage, or else they're in the wrong job. In actual fact, a lot of that has to do here this year with minimum wage and with some of the other things. What, if any, movement do you see or suggestions do you see in that area that we might want to start taking a look at?
I think the minimum wage, we increased it last year. I think right now most people will be happy with that current increase. I think we're going to see this year more of an increase in public sector salaries.
Yeah.
And that's going to be something the governor has to negotiate.
Yeah, and it's scary because the rank and file folks outside of the government sector have nothing to say. One big concern is this. I hear it a lot. I'm sure you do too. A lot of small businesses that are affected by a change in the minimum wage might say, in order to do this, we have to either curtail or back burner expansion because we just can't afford these people.
Right, and it really depends on the extent of the wage increase. I heard from a lot of people that they could do 25 cents, but they couldn't do $1 or $2 or $3.
Sure.
So trying to minimize the increase in the minimum wage, because you don't want to increase it so much that you start losing jobs, and that's the point at which the legislature was at.
There was a point in time that Governor Abercrombie and I'm sure now Governor Ige is saying, well, this is not a big issue because it doesn't affect that many people in Hawaii. I'm thinking that it kind of does. That there's a lot of people that embarrassingly wouldn't admit it, but they are working a second or third job for a minimum wage just because they need the money.
Yes, and it also bounces up all other wages. So it's not just going to impact that small group of people earning a minimum wage.
Yeah, Beth, I'm so glad to hear you say that for three reasons. First of all, last week, immediately we had a caller by somebody that said, hey, look, I make now what's going to be the minimum wage, and I'm skilled. Right. And so the minute a newbie comes in, I'm going to have to go to my boss and say, you can't pay me the same amount as this guy.
Right.
And a lot of them are going to just seal their lips because they might think, well, gee, if I say that, the boss is going to say, okay, goodbye.
Right.
And have the minimum wage guy do it.
Right.
Don't we all suffer when that happens?
Yes, and that's the problem, and I think the legislature doesn't always understand that. If you raise it to $13 an hour, which was up for discussion, then you bounce everything up way past what people can afford.
When you talk about jobs, and that seems to be the number one word, boo, jobs, everybody gets happy. In reality, are we talking about jobs in the government sector, or are we trying to encourage jobs in the private sector? Because it looks to me as though the government sector is pretty full up.
I think that always depends on who you're talking to. Everybody likes to talk about jobs. Nobody likes to come up with any specific ideas. For me, I'm focused on jobs for the millennial generation, which means a lot more entrepreneurial work. And that generally means the private sector. I don't see the public sector doing that very often.
There's a major concern I know, and recently I don't want to say expose, but the pointing out of the disparaging amount of overtime that's being paid, say in the Department of State and the prison system.
Right.
That this is, you can't blame the guys and gals that are taking the overtime because it's there.
And they're showing up for work.
Of course, but what about how do we get these other guys that will call in sick today and and working overtime tomorrow. I mean, how do we have somebody take a look at the system and say, okay, there's some flaws in the system. We're not going to hire new people because we can't afford it, but we're going to make it so that we can operate without paying out so much overtime. Is there common ground? Who's going to do this for us?
See, I think that's really a management issue. I think it's got to come from the top down. So the Department of Public Safety, but specifically the governor, it's something that he's going to have to take a strong look at.
How do we tumble stuff uphill so that happens? I mean, we just what I get concerned about is now I'm picking up the paper or I'm getting press releases, and there's this new person here and there's this new person there. Not only do I not know where the old people are that were a communication link with me, but I'm not sure what their stances are, and I think maybe that takes a while. Maybe in Governor Ige's administration for the first year, we're not going to really know who's on first.
Right, and it's sort of a bad time to drop the ball. So I'm hoping he can hit the ground running. It certainly is difficult because, as you said, with the cabinet members, he's having some trouble, and sometimes he's having trouble because people didn't expect him to win necessarily.
That's a very good point.
So,
in retrospect, doesn't that show you how ripe we were for somebody to make a change?
Yeah.
I mean, literally, David Ige was David and Goliath. I mean, he was really not even thought to be, and yet he graciously stepped into the position. He said, "Okay,
yep,
I'm glad to do this." But maybe, and wasn't there the same sort of accusation at the beginning of the Abercrombie administration? Well, he's been in Washington for so long, he doesn't know what it's like to run this big business.
Yes. And I think that's the good thing about Governor Ige is that he has been at the legislature, so he does know the ins and outs of the policy. I think putting together a giant team is very different sometimes than being a senator. So that's going to be the transition for him.
Before we go to the news break, I want to go to the national level for a minute, just get your opinion on something, because I keep a track, and I always announce on the program how our elected officials voted in Washington, D.C. And I saw in the latest one that came out, that they voted in lockstep with the Democrats on every issue. Everybody voted the same. And maybe there is some point in time where they're maybe not getting it, that it's better to take a look at some of these things, and maybe there would be a hope for maybe the newbies, maybe Takai, or maybe somebody to say, hey, I got to go with my heart on this because I'm not. Yeah. I may be representing the party, but not the state.
Right. Well, as the minority in the state legislature, I can say that we're constantly under pressure to make some sort of compromise and to work across the aisle, because otherwise how do you get things done?
Nothing,
Right. And I think the same is true in Washington, D.C. If our senators and representatives don't start working across the aisle, how are they going to get things done? So I think the argument that gets used against us all the time as Republicans is the reverse now.
Well, what I think is interesting is that none of them are saying, well, I'm voting yes, but it's with reservations. I don't feel good about it.
Right.
But I have to do this because it leans a little bit more to what I think in the not. And I don't think that anybody stood up outside of maybe Congresswoman Gabbard a little bit and just said, hey, there's some things I'm not happy with.
And she's the only one that I ever see do that. I actually really, truly believe that she can work across the aisle.
Yeah, and it looks that way. And I hope that it rubs off on some of the others. Okay, if you want to join the conversation, you can. When we get back, Beth Fukumoto Chang and I are going to talk about what's coming up this week. In other words, what can you take a look at? And more importantly, how can you get into the habit of taking a look at everything so that you can decide where you want to put your 2 cents in?
Mike Buck, all Honolulu, all the time, on AM 690, The Answer.
Okay, well, the R Party is doing busy stuff right now in Washington, D.C. They're all jockeying for position. Latest deal out is Donald Trump comes out today and absolutely hammers Romney. Now, it was really interesting because Beth Fukumoto Chang is in the house, and it just so happened, Beth, my wife and I were watching this thing about the 60s last night, and there was this really neat thing about Mitt Romney and when he was this dashing movie star-looking guy. Well, he's still around, and there are some that are saying, in order to make changes, there has to be a dramatic change. Talk about the millennials a little bit and how pleasant it is to see, at least on the national levels, that a lot of them are coming in to take a look at what the Republicans can offer, because the Democrats are disappointing.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be the second, and after the boomers, right? These are the children of boomers. We're a huge generation. And
Which you're in, by the way.
I am. I'm the first millennial minority leader. And you know, I think we really do care a lot about jobs and the economy and the cost of living. And just because we're the most hit by the Great Recession.
You know, I'm going to wonder, because I think this is true, at least in parts of my family, that the boomers were not sufficiently prepared by their parents to what to expect. And what's happened so fast to the millennials is that we now see these drastic shifts. Things aren't subtle anymore. When things go bad, they go very bad.
Yes.
You know, did you take a look, for instance, and I know it's sort of off subject, I want to get back to this, but there's just this huge controversy going on in Greece right now about the euro, about whether they should drop out, not take the euro. They've just elected this really left-wing liberal socialist sort of a guy that could affect the whole world. Isn't it amazing how things can swing so dramatically these days?
Yeah, and I think that's what it actually does loop back, because I think that is why millennials tend to distrust government a little bit more, is just because we've seen what it's like. We've seen that government at the end of the day cannot bail us out. And even when they try, we're still stuck without being able to find jobs and being able to afford houses.
There's a lot of people that think that everybody that's a millennial is going to walk into a high-tech, high-paid job. And from what we understand, there's lots and lots of folks coming out of college with staggering debt and a job that doesn't reflect the money that they spent getting educated.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of us are in that situation. I'm still paying off student loans.
Sure.
Yeah.
So how does somebody say, well, I can do something in the public sector because I'm not going to get the huge big money, so I might as well make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is that millennials have also sort of not been as interested in public sector jobs, right? So they're all going to the private. A lot are going to the private sector, and they're entrepreneurs. They're trying to start businesses.
Sure.
And that's why we have trouble sometimes keeping them in the state of Hawaii.
You know, let me ask you this, and I'm not sure even if you know him, but I came to know during the city council race in my district, Trevor Ozawa. Both he and his wife are in your gang, right?
Yep.
And both of them are looked at, all right, we want to make a contribution to our families. It's more important than to our bank accounts. How important is it for people to be able to work with people like that, even though they're in different parties?
I think it's very important. I think that you see that at the legislature, too. There are a lot of us that are millennials that have just said, okay, fine, we have to work together because this is crazy. The way government's being run is crazy.
But Beth, what about the age-old, same old, same old? In order to do this, you got to do that. And it seems to me like maybe the millennials might be a little more opposed to exchanging values or lowering values. In other words, I don't know if I want to make deals to get something done.
I think millennials are pragmatists at heart, and I think that at the end of the day, they just want to get things done.
Yeah. How do you get people in that are boomers or older to get some faith in a millennial, or put some say, okay, this person may not have done a whole bunch, but they really look like they're qualified. Should we give them a chance?
Yeah, it's difficult, and what I was recently reading something about how to work with different generations in the workplace. And it applies to the legislature very well. It says, boomers and traditionalists value things like experience, whereas millennials very much do not. They value ideas and pragmatic politics.
One of the things that I've heard, and I don't know if you hear this or not, and I'm sure it reflects it in the ledge, that there are a lot of people that all of a sudden have a supervisor or a boss that is young enough to be their child, and there's a lot of resentment saying, how can this person be telling me what to do when I've been doing this for 35 years and they just got out of college?
Yeah, I'm sure some of my caucus members feel that way sometimes.
I'm wondering,
Yeah.
Speaking about that, there are a number of things that are happening party-wise, and I do know that it's difficult when you're in elective office to spend time talking about party stuff when you have to worry about the legislature. But don't we have some decisions at the caucus level that need to be made? And there's ongoing meetings, I think 31st, 5th, 6th, and all of that stuff. How do you encourage people to attend these?
We're coming off of a rough election for Republicans, and people tend to just want to give up and go home. And if somebody sees themselves 2 years from now wanting to get involved, they need to get involved now. Otherwise, they're going to face the same results.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Why would we expect something different?
Right.
What about talk about in you and David's case? I mean, at what point in time did you guys say to each other, "Hey, you know what? We can't just go pursue the golden ring. We have to contribute somehow."
I think both for David, it's always been something that he's wanted to do. It's why he went to West Point over maybe some other schools that would have been just specifically private sector. And for me, it's just seeing an opportunity to make a difference and to use what I'm good at. A lot of it was, for me, out of necessity that I got involved.
Yeah. I was going to say that, once you're in that mode, you can't ignore it. And once you ignore it, then you start seeing things, right?
Right.
Does that help pave the way to get other people involved? I know that right now, that 90% of what you all do is social networking and these flash this and mob that. I mean, move, get going right away and get involved.
Right. Yeah, I think it does help to get more people involved. And it's a good thing for Republicans because we're of a younger generation, we have this opportunity to try to recruit more of those people that are maybe being ignored right now.
Yeah, by the way, I'm getting a bunch of email, and I'm trying to explain that when we do these chats, they have to be live. I don't want to be accused of stacking the deck and making somebody either comfortable or uncomfortable based on a so-and-so that just emailed in. So if you want, those of you that are emailing, please turn them into phone calls at 296-KHNR. That's 296-5467. We are learning about things, Beth, that didn't exist 5 years ago. I mean, the internet has so changed the way we think and do business. There are a lot of merchants here that I know are complaining, and yet you are a free-thinking millennial that wants free speech and free trade and all of that stuff. How do we protect bricks and mortar merchants in Hawaii from all of us that are online trying to get a better deal and not buying stuff?
I think it's reducing the cost of doing business in Hawaii. I don't think it's trying to prevent people from buying outside of the state, because I just don't think we're going to be able to do that. People still prefer to walk into a store. I prefer to see something.
I must admit, though, I'm more likely to do my research online.
Yes.
To find out what something can do before I go find out if I want to buy it or not.
Yes. It is always going to be hard in Hawaii. We're not going to get things that fast. I can see if you're on the mainland and you can get things in 24 hours, fine.
Yeah.
But we can't here. So I'm always going to prefer at the last minute to run to the store. It's just got to get cheaper here.
Well, it's both a boon and a blessing to have the big boxes, because the big boxes are numbers people.
Right.
And if the left-handed widget doesn't sell, they're not going to send it to Hawaii. But yet you're out there in Kahului and you need one,
Right.
Yeah. More to come is if you'd like to join us, the number's 296-KHNR. That's 296-5467.
Mike Buck on AM 690. The Answer.
Okay, so they cleaned out all of the musubis and everything from the big square building, and I thought they just jumped right into things, but in actual fact, there's a couple of things that I was just learning from Beth Fukumoto Chang off the air. A couple of things that happened this week, and number one, Beth, I guess everybody is trying to anticipate or trying to figure out what the governor is going to have to say in his State of the State address. Now that we've had the State of the Union, when do you get advanced information on the topics being discussed, and who is going to respond?
We don't get a ton of advanced information. We usually get an advanced copy of his speech
that day, early that day.
Yeah, we should probably be getting it about a half an hour, and that should give us some idea. Hopefully, his bills come out soon, so we're going to see his bills. That's going to be really the specifics. Okay, now when you say that, I would imagine that everybody, yourself included, that is sitting on things that you want to see done, you might want to find before you put them in. And this is why this week it's a little early to have discussions on specific bills, because everybody's sort of playing hide and seek. Right. We want to see what the governor's priorities are. For me, I mean... good point. In other words, the speech is going to outline what his main message is going to be. Yeah, so if he's going to say, I mean, for me, there's a bill in particular that I'm interested in, a crowdfunding bill. If he says, we don't want to do any more, we don't want any crowdfunding or, whatever. I mean, it's a crazy example, but if he says that, then okay, I might reconsider my bill. Yeah. But I still need to know,
that it seems to me that everybody has desires, and they all have a thing to make a bill. And many of them are very similar. And they sort of all go into a hopper until a more specific one comes out. Is that when the yin and the yang works in the very beginning, when you say, gee, governor has a bill, well, so do I, and they're not that far apart.
Yeah. Yeah, and you often see maybe 10 bills on the same topic. Yeah. We're going to see a lot of bills on reducing the historic preservation requirements for houses that are not historic. We'll probably see a lot of bills for that. We're going to see a lot of bills dealing with HECO. And a number of other issues, I'm sure.
There's one that comes up at the city level that I do know that the city is looking at, the council is looking at, and so goes the city, so goes the state.
Right.
And they're taking a look at this Ohana zoning thing and extra income property. And there are many that think that while we should be addressing these concerns, thinking that there's going to be a quick fix by everybody being able to build a rental unit, it might be a bigger burden or hard to turn around. At what point in time does that sort of maneuver get to the state level, or does it?
The Ohana zoning is very much just a city issue. I think the city should be focusing a little bit more on transit-oriented development, as we were talking about earlier. But there's very little the state can do to push those things.
Yeah, I think that, when you say what trumps, I mean, obviously if there's a homeowners association agreement that trumps the city about height limit or number of air conditioning units in the window and all that stuff you can have, that they win.
Right, and there are some places. I mean, in my district, we have a homeowners association everywhere. So I don't foresee that happening in my district. Yeah. But I think the place where the state really affects rental units is we make decisions on who you can and can't discriminate against in your own home.
You're 100% accurate to that. And one of the main concerns that we've heard is, all right, no matter what gets enacted, if it doesn't get enforced, then there's going to be a problem. You might say, well, you can build a unit on your place and rent it out, but you have to have a parking stall. But in fact, they don't, and now there's no place to park on the street.
Right. And maybe you will, the state will say, well, you can't limit, who lives there or how many people live there, or, and then people might just say, okay, well, then I don't want to risk having, a rental unit.
Yeah, and there's going to be any number of people that want to do that. But I still think that maybe the other part of it is, and maybe it's a little bit too early to tell because the bills haven't all come out, but we anticipate more cooperation between the city and the state, or the counties and the state regarding the issue of homelessness. It's not going away. And what do you expect to see that might be trying to be enacted at a state level to help the counties?
Yeah, hopefully. I think a lot of the sit-lie bans and all those conversations I would like to see take place at a city level, because it really depends whether or not you're on the Big Island or on Oahu, how you feel about those things. So I would like to see those taken care of at a city level, but certainly housing is a statewide issue. Well,
when you talk about sit-lie, let's say that it was done at a state level, doesn't that then put a burden on the counties to enforce something? They may not have the budget to have 15 more inspectors.
Right, and a lot of places just don't need it. And I always prefer to not enact laws that we don't need. So if we don't need it to be a state thing, then let's keep it at a county level.
It says here, even though I don't take email, it says here, please ask this millennial lady what crowdfunding is. That's a great question, because this is something, there are a lot of things that are new. They're certainly new to the oldsters that people have no idea. In the Beth Chang Fukumoto definition, what's crowdfunding?
Crowdfunding is raising money from a bunch of small donors. So we can do it currently if you're just getting donations. There are two different models, donation and equity.
Donation means I give you $50 because I believe in what you're doing with no expectation.
For example, since we're on the topic of homelessness, I have a friend of my sister's who just did a crowdfunding project for the homeless, and she got bands for them that contain their IDs. They couldn't take them off. It contains all their personal records, their health information. And she raised all the money online. She raised $10,000 that way from small donations. That's
because that just seems maybe to somebody that's a good thing to do.
Yeah,
and I'm in. Here's my $25 or whatever.
Right. And it was a great idea. Maybe it's something the state can implement someday. But she thought, I don't want to go through that process. Let's just try it. Now, on a business level, when young people are starting businesses, they often go to their friends and to others to say, hey, can you donate some money? Maybe it's a food truck, maybe it's a tech company. But right
Signed
now,
hopeful. So with my fingers crossed, I'm going to do this business.
Right. But right now, you can't offer equity in your company that way. So crowdfunding in Hawaii, if we change the law, would be to allow us to get equity that way.
Okay, so that means that I come up with my $50, I get 1/2 of 1% of the business, or whatever it's going to be.
Right. And it authorizes me to allow that.
One of the things that you often hear about, and I've had countless talks with small business administration people and others, is that there's this huge entrepreneurial group of young people like yourself.
Right.
But the biggest problem that they do is that they don't have a thorough or accurate or realistic business plan. So a lot of these things are great ideas, but they don't raise enough money and then they fall by the wayside. Right. So would this mean that there might be legislation to encourage more people to invest, to have equity?
Well, I think this. It's hard to have the state encourage people to invest, I think.
Or to take a roll of the dice.
Right.
Yeah.
I think this is more, there are people that want to give capital to a good project. It's just they want to have something in return. They want equity. They don't want to just donate the money to a business, right?
Yeah.
So.
Okay, now there's another thing that I meant to get at earlier, and it was on my list of things to ask Beth, and that was there's one representative that is coming up with something that sounds pretty cockamamie to me. I don't know if it's going to have any legs, but this is to put slot machines in international airports, but the only people who can play them are people that are leaving. Doesn't this seem like a left-handed money grab on people that have already spent a bunch of money here?
That's very creative.
I mean, it is, but that means that I can't go down to the airport for lunch. You and I can't go down there and pull some handles, right?
Right.
Because we're not leaving town.
Right. I don't know how you would enforce that.
That's pretty discriminatory, don't you think?
Yeah, I don't know how you.
You're going
to
have a ticket.
You have to stick your ticket in the machine, I guess. That would have to.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah, I don't know. Interesting.
Well, what I would do is I'd get one ticket, right? Nobody's going to leave, and I'd bring 50 people down there with me and put the ticket in 50 machines so they can all play slots for me and pay me a little percentage.
Right.
But I mean, isn't this sort of a little tiny crack? You're opening the door a little bit, and once you do that, it's a landslide.
Yeah. No, and I had not heard that yet.
Yeah. There's always, there's stuff that comes up every year. We talked about this last year. What, if anything, do you know of? I mean, there's always going to be somebody going to try a lottery. Oh, it's for education, for the kids.
Right.
Or for the roads.
Right.
Going to be some this year?
Every year.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if there wasn't. I haven't heard that there's going to be a big push to pass anything, but there's always some suggestion.
What about the age-old one? Do we really need 50 million dispensaries for marijuana, or can't we have it controlled by a certain number of places? This looks like, once again, creating entrepreneurial openings for people to sell dope.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about a money grab, that's the place to look. $35,000 for a license to open a dispensary is really just the state trying to make money off of marijuana.
Not only that, Beth, but I'm concerned about something else, and that is the risk that I have. I come up with my $35,000 now on a slow day, and somebody really wants to buy something, and it looks okay. That's a big temptation.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the way to do it would be to dispense it out of hospital pharmacies. Sure. That's the safest way to do it.
Somebody said, and I'm sure this has come up, and if you do the math, how many people really need it? And they're going to open, 16 of these things? I mean, wouldn't you know in advance that you need it, and you get a month's supply, or you go down this is not something you need in 14 minutes. You don't have to be able to go down to your neighborhood dispensary.
Right. And I mean, I have to get all my medication a month in advance, right? I mean, we all have to do that for heart medicine and for things like that. So I'm sure there's a way to set it up so it's more like medication. And that's the problem right now is we're not the Democrats in the legislature that really want to pass this, the progressive Democrats, like to say it's medication, but then don't treat it like medication. And I think that's where we have to see a change. Yeah,
and there's so much information on it right now, and no one would begrudge, I'm sure, I don't know if you feel this way, but I do, that if somebody really has a problem and can be helped or aided by this as a medicine, no problem.
Oh, yeah.
As long as you're not driving a car, next to me, because I'd be a little bit concerned about that.
Sure. Terminal illness, pain management for terminal illness. There are definitely things that
unfortunately, they used this one model the other day of this young child. I think this little baby that needed this oil, and this mother didn't know how to get it, didn't want to buy it on the street.
She lives in my district.
Yeah, is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
So wouldn't that person be able to be satisfied or accommodated at the hospital where the doctor is?
Right, and that's what, or even in our Mililani Malka CVS, right? If the pharmacy that is a legitimate pharmacy could do it.
Okay, we are flat out of time. I look forward to seeing you next week, and I guess next week we can roll our sleeves up and get dirty on some of these things, right? Thank you so much.
Yep.
In the meantime, when is the governor's State of the State?
10 a.m.
All right, that's going to happen. Thanks, Beth.